Hello, my name's Dr. P. I'm the founder and president of Crimson Coaching. This webinar is called Applying to College One Step at a Time. I'm a former high school teacher turned academic tutor, test prep coach, and college counselor. And I've been doing this through Crimson Coaching for the past 7 years. A lot of people ask me, why is your company called Crimson Coaching? And as you can see from the mats of the photo and diploma behind me, they are crimson, and they are from my alma mater, Harvard. And that's why I called my company Crimson Coaching. And I developed this talk because I work privately with students one-on-one throughout the 11th and 12th grades. And a mom with whom I was particularly close mentioned that she could have really used a season by season or month by month guide of what to do when for her daughter during the college application process. And so thus this was born. Today's agenda is I'll be speaking for about 30 minutes. And normally when we're not doing this as a pre-recorded lecture, as we are right now, I usually will take questions and answers, but because this is pre-recorded, I encourage you to share your questions with me at info@crimsoncoaching.com, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can, or post your questions in the comment of YouTube. But before we go any further, I do just want to thank you all for watching. Thank Laura Panter, the young adult librarian at Sachem Public Library, for organizing this talk, and for Sachem Public Library for hosting it. So before we dive in, I just want to mention that this timeline that I'll be talking about represents the ideal, but any timeline, any ideal timeline requires some flexibility, and never is that more so the case than during COVID-19. COVID has really upended the college application process quite a bit, and that requires a lot of flexibility, both on the parts of the colleges themselves, as well as on the applicants and their parents. However, I'm a big believer in planning, and I sort of believe that if you schedule this early enough and you try to, schedule and plan early, little planning can make even the ideal possible and perhaps even enjoyable. So let's just talk a little bit about why the junior year is so important. A lot of students hear the junior year. Well, it is really important, primarily because it's really where your grades should be hitting their high mark. You know, a lot of students struggle in the transition between 8th and 9th grade because the transition between middle and high school is such a big social transition as well as an academic transition. So if your 9th grade grades weren't great, that's really not a big problem. And as I discuss in my talk, College Planning for 9th and 10th Graders, which I'll be giving several more times this spring. So if you're, this fall rather, so if you're hearing this before November 3rd, 2021, feel free to go to my website, crimsoncoaching.com, to sign up for free to attend that talk. But I talk about how 10th grade, many students' grades normalize, or at least they should be normalizing. And so hopefully you picked harder courses in 11th grade. And this is really a time when you can show mastery in the courses that you're good at. Say if you're more of a math science kid, you're doing that. Or if you're more of a humanities kid, you're really excelling in those classes. So usually junior year is hopefully the time when your GPA is the highest because you have the most experience. And of course, when you send it to colleges in the beginning of your senior year, it will be the most recent full year grades that they have for you. And so this is also why it's such an important year. Of course, many students take the SAT or ACT in this year. Back when I went to high school, back in the 80s, students took it once, maybe twice in the spring, and that was pretty much it. but now this has really become a year-round proposition. I advise that if you took advanced math as an eighth grader, that you should really try to get your SAT, ACT prep done in the summer between your sophomore and junior year, because you have the most intellectual and emotional bandwidth to deal with a 6 or 8 or 10 week proposition that studying for the SAT really should be. It needn't, some test prep companies drag SAT prep out for a year and a half. I don't think that that's at all necessary, but I do believe that if you'd like to get it done in 8 to 10 weeks, as I normally recommend to my private clients, that you do have to be willing to devote, 5 to 10 hours a week on SAT prep. And I feel like that's actually much more of an efficient and effective use of your time. And during the junior year, when you're concentrating perhaps on those tough AP courses, as well as your extracurriculars, sometimes you're just not able to give the SAT, ACT prep the kinds of attention that it really requires. And so that's why I recommend that ideal would be in between the summer of 10th and 11th grade. And then finally, I recommend the junior year be really the latest point at which you start looking at different kinds of colleges. Now, again, if you go to my college planning for 9th and 10th graders talk, I do recommend that it start as a freshman. But realistically, I know that that normally doesn't happen, even perhaps for students and their families who attend my talks. So realistically, what should you be doing? Well, you should be going to books like the Fisk Guide to Colleges and looking at which types of settings look good to you. You can also visit different types of universities within really like a 2-hour radius of where we live right now, and visit rural, suburban, urban schools, big schools, small schools, medium schools, public schools, private schools, and any permutation of those 3 characteristics to find out which school is the best for you. I'm not saying that if you visit Vassar College in Poughkeepsie or Southampton College that or SUNY Stony Brook, that you will go there, but you may know whether a small liberal arts college in the suburbs, a big public school in the suburbs, or if you visited NYU, a big private school in the city is right for you. So that by the time you get to the spring of junior year, you're able to make trips to colleges that are perhaps more pointed, more directed, and that will save your parents some time and money. So let's look at what students should be doing between September and December of their junior year. And by the way, those other things that I just were talking about, these things, sorry about that, these things really are things that should be going throughout the entire junior year, with the exception of the SAT, ACT, which you could really do it at any point by the end of your junior year. But in terms of what to do September through December, again, grades, grades, grades. Make sure that you are starting the year off strong so that your GPA next year is the strongest it could be, because the rigor of your coursework and your GPA are the 2 most important criteria that colleges will judge your candidacy on. Also, make sure that you're fulfilling some kind of extracurricular plan. And what I mean by that is, you don't want to be, as a junior, kind of going to 17 million clubs like you were going to as a freshman. You want to kind of be honing your extracurricular time so that you're doing things only that you really love and hopefully that you're really good at. And then potentially you could even begin to take a leadership role in. Those things will begin to show you as a dedicated, serious student, both inside and outside the classroom. You also want to take charge of cultivating relationships with teachers. Of course, I mean a professional relationship, by which I mean you'll be attending extra help, either before school, after school, or during school, so that you can show that teacher how dedicated you are to their class. Pop by just to say hi, so that they get to know you as a person outside of the classroom. Make sure that you're doing this for at least 2 teachers that you feel like you have some sort of rapport with, because at the end of the year, you'll be asking 2 of them for a letter of recommendation. And then finally, outside of the classroom, I really strongly recommend that you read. If not for pleasure, then at least for the knowledge that you will be increasing your capacity to do well on the reading comprehension sections of the SAT and ACT. The subject that I find, or section that I find as an SAT, ACT coach, that students have the most difficulty with, and that frankly is the most difficult for me as a tutor to help them change their score on, is reading. Because reading is something that you've been doing since you were 5 years old or 6 years old. And so if you are not in the habit of reading passages that are about 1,000 words that you can really identify the main idea to, it's going to be very difficult for you to do that on one of these 2 standardized tests. And if you're wondering what you should read, feel free to go to the blog tab on my website. The website is down there in the corner, crimsoncoaching.com, and there's a little tab up at the top that says blog. I recently wrote a piece on, it's entitled something like "Want to be a better writer than read," or "Want to be a better reader and writer, read." So if you're not sure of what you should be reading, I have some suggestions in that blog piece for you. It'll also, as the title suggests, reading will also help you when it comes to writing your college application essay next year as a senior. And if you're interested in what your college application essay might look like, feel free to attend my talk. If you're watching this on November 1st, how to write a great college application essay. And again, you can go to the classes and workshops page of my website to sign up for that for free as well. And finally, college visits. I mentioned visiting different types of colleges: suburban, urban, rural, big, small, private, public. Of course, if you can't get to them, it's always better if you could start visiting those different types local, okay? Because that's going to give you much more information than a virtual tour can. Then definitely, at the very least, start to visit schools that you're interested in, whether they're near or far, by their online tours. Schools have a ton of online tours now since COVID. It's sort of one of the silver linings, I guess, in college admissions of COVID. But those should really be helping you narrow your focus. And I gave this talk in person a couple of nights ago, and someone asked a great question about this point. And so I'll include that in my remarks for you today. The question was, how should I know what to look for when I'm attending a college tour, either in person or online? And I said, that really depends on what you want out of college, okay? Ron Lieber, who wrote The Price You Pay for College, who is a New York Times personal finance columnist, and he published that book in January of 2021. In that book, Lieber suggests that there are 3 reasons why people attend college. First, to have their mind blown. Second, to find their tribe, the people who will stand up for them at their wedding, the people who they'll marry, for example. And the third is for pre-professional reasons, such as getting a better job. Now, most of us probably attend college for all 3 of those reasons, but one is most likely paramount, okay? And so you need to really look inside and think, well, what is my reason for applying to college? Really, what is my most important reason? And for example, I was a kid who wanted to have my mind blown. That was the reason I went to Harvard. I actually graduated from Connecticut, your arch rival, and I really wanted an intellectually stimulating environment when I went away to school. Had I gone on to the website of a school, if they had the internet back then, they didn't. If I had gone on to a website like a school like University of Michigan, where football is really big, or the Ohio State University, where football is also really big, that probably wouldn't have been the place for me back then. Not to say, I mean, you can have your mind blown at those places, but the tribe wasn't right for me. And especially, I think, back in those days, perhaps the intellectual reputation wasn't as strong as the social reputation at those schools. And so I think it's really important that you align your own values with those of the university tour that you're going through or watching online. So in January through March, after the holidays, if you haven't already done the ACT or SAT, you really want to try prepping for that so that hopefully you can get that done by March or April of this year, at least the first test. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a sec. Again, many students start as rising juniors, but you want to account for the fact that the second test is usually better. After the second test, studies show there's really a point of diminishing returns. So you really want to time your prep, I believe, so that your first and second tests are relatively close together. So for example, I'm tutoring a boy right now for the SAT, and he's been kind of hemming and hawing, not wanting to do a lot of his practice tests. And his mom said, well, can't we just do December and March? And I said, certainly you could, but it would be a lot better to do it November, December, because those 2 tests are much closer together, and he won't have to drag out that studying for 3 more months if you do it between December and March, okay? So I recommend looking at when your second test will be relative to the first, and then plan backwards. If you're able to devote 5 to 10 hours a week to studying, plan backwards about 8 to 10 weeks from there, okay? A lot has been made about the proliferation of test optional admissions. In the wake of COVID-19, of course, many test centers were closed down in the spring of 2020, all the way in continuing into the spring of 2021. And so many colleges went test optional. You could submit your test scores if they were good. You didn't have to submit them if you didn't want to. And a lot of times I get asked by families, well, should we just go test optional? My view is that for people from this neck of the woods, Long Island, where the public schools are usually very good relative to the rest of the nation, there are a lot of people applying to college. You need every single aspect of your application to be strong. And so you really don't want to just negate the test scores. The only time where I recommend really not thinking about even prepping for the test at all is one of two situations. The first, if you feel that prepping would give you so much anxiety that you might have some kind of mental health crisis. And I say this with real empathy and understanding that mental health is paramount, first of all, and the mental health epidemic among teens, or unhealth among teens right now and during the pandemic, has been really unprecedented. And I don't think that it's ever worth having a mental health crisis for school. Not at all. Okay. The other type of person that I don't recommend taking it is if you have a straight A average in school, and so that would be 90% or above, an A or above, and you know that historically you have tested in the bottom 50% of your class, then I probably wouldn't bother taking the SAT, because most likely the SAT or ACT is not going to help you very much. Okay. However, I don't really think that that's the majority of kids. Okay. So for instance, if you have a B and you've been in the bottom 50%, I think you really need to work on getting yourself out of that 50% so you can convince a college that you're able to handle their workload. Okay. And likewise, even if you're getting an A or a B, and you're in, say, 25 to 50% in that quartile there, work as hard as you can so that you can get into either as selective a college as possible, and or perhaps get offered some merit aid because you've got a really strong test score. So the spring of junior year, this is time that really has a lot of anxiety among students. And I realize that these two dates are not in the spring. It's because generally I often do this talk in the spring, but the next two SAT dates from right now are November 6th and December 4th. In the spring, they'll be in March, May, and June of 2022. The next SAT date is December, and then after that, February and April in 2022. Okay. And if you haven't taken your SAT or ACT yet, you will probably take it by the spring. But again, I'm not such a fan of doing this in the spring because many students in April and May are studying for their AP exams. And especially if your scores for the SAT or ACT wind up being low, your AP scores rather are scores that can really help boost your chances of college admission. And so you really want to put a lot of emphasis into studying for those AP exams so you can get that 4 or 5. And then finally, those teachers with whom you've been cultivating a relationship since September, you will approach them before you leave for school in June and ask them, will you write me a good letter of recommendation? And notice that I capitalize the word good. I used to be a teacher, a high school teacher, as I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, and I taught every grade, but when I taught juniors AP US history, I would frequently get asked to write letter of recommendation for them. And, 99 times out of 100, it was a good letter of recommendation. But there was a time when one student asked me for a letter, and I didn't really feel that I could write her a good letter. And I thought it was more important that I tell her this, and I did, so that she had a chance to get a better letter of recommendation from someone else. I'm pretty unafraid with a verbally uncomfortable situation like this, but lots of teachers are afraid of it. So I would say that not every teacher is going to be that honest with you. And maybe some teachers might just write a mediocre letter and call it a day. So I would much rather that you know beforehand whether that letter is going to be good. And you really need to get that teacher's word that it'll be good so that your chances of acceptance are as strong as possible. So when you leave for the summer in June, I really think, give yourself a week or two of rest. But by July 1st, you really want to start on that common app, that dreaded common application. You can start with just filling in the biographical and extracurricular data, maybe in times when you're tired, maybe it's after work, maybe you don't feel inspired. But at the same time, when you do feel energetic and creative, start that personal statement. And I can tell you right now, by the way, it's October 27th, and I am working with lots of students, some of whom since July, some of whom just this for the first time this week, on their common application personal statements. And I can tell you that students who just approached me for private coaching this week, many times, they're not answering a question. They're just writing kind of whatever they feel like in 650 words. That's not what the task is, okay? The task is to answer one of the 7 prompts at commonapp.org. So rather than write something and then later on try to shoehorn your essay into one of the 7 prompts, start by answering one of the 7 prompts right from the get-go. If that is one of my biggest pieces of advice, it would be that, okay? If you'd like other pieces of advice, yes, I've written a blog piece on this too. In fact, I've actually written 3 blog pieces on how to write a great college application essay. So again, go to crimsoncoaching.com and you can go to the blog and you'll find them there. And in addition, I regularly give this talk. The next time I'll give it will be on November 1st, 2021, on how to write a great college application essay. But know that the Common App, while it is the most popular among students in our area, because most of the schools in our area use the Common App as the portal through which you will apply to that school, it is not the only. Some schools use the Coalition app. If you're applying to schools in the UK, they use a system called UCAS. If you're applying to any of the University of California schools, they have their own system. So does Cal State has another system. University of Texas has its own system, and Texas State has its own system. So all of these have different essay requirements. It's not all the same 650 word essay. To give you just an example, the University of California system requires 4 350 word essays. So completely different form. Okay. So this is why starting early on those essays really pays off. And I should also say why having your college list finalized early will also pay off, because if you know, hey, I'm also applying to University of California in addition to NYU, then you know you need to start that essay really soon. And again, I have another talk called Crafting a College List. I don't think I'm giving it any time soon, but it is the video of a prior time I gave it is on my YouTube, Crimson Coaching's YouTube. So you can find that there if you're still if you're a 12th grader, or even if you're 11th grader and still trying to figure out how you should craft your college list, okay? I recommend by September 1st, having your main personal statement done, that big 650 word essay, or maybe at least 3 of the 4 University of California system ones done. Okay. So that by autumn of the senior year, you can work on the many supplemental essays that are either required or optional. And I will just say, again, this was a question asked on Monday night about this talk. One of the parents asked me if students should write optional essays. You know, if it says optional, do I have to write it? Certainly not. You don't have to. But when I'm coaching students privately, I recommend that they always do. Always. Okay. Even if for example, the 250 word COVID essay that really was probably intended as a place for students to write what went wrong for them during COVID. And certainly there were lots of students who suffered tremendous losses. And I don't want to denigrate that experience. But I had a student who was lucky enough to have nobody that she loved get sick, whose grades went up during COVID, and who actually liked being at home. So I had her, this was last year, she went to Port Washington High School, it was Schreiber High School in Port Washington. She's now at University of Vermont. She wrote an essay about how the extra time and mental and emotional bandwidth that she had during COVID allowed her to start tutoring a young boy through her public library. And that boy was really going through some academic distress during COVID because he was completely online and his mom was not a native English speaker. His mom only spoke Spanish. And my student happened to be taking Spanish in school. So my student was able to not only help this young boy with his studies, but also communicate with the mom and show her Spanish study in action live. Okay. So that's what we wrote about for the 250 word COVID essay, which, by the way, she couldn't really fit in anywhere in any of the other essays, because that's an experience that doesn't really fit nicely and tidily into the activities list that only gives you 150 characters to talk about your activities. So that's why I say, and by the way, the student of mine, she got in every single school she applied to. So it just goes to show you that putting in that little bit of extra work can really pay off by springtime. So especially if you are applying either early decision or early actions, your deadlines are usually November 1st, although I've heard of a couple that recently that have been either October 1st or October 15th. So again, another reason why it's important to have that personal statement done by September 1st. Okay. You also want to be using these months of early autumn to get those letters of recommendation in from your teachers. Sometimes they need some gentle reminders to do so. And then lots of guidance counselors like to see the entire package with the letters, with your essays, with your all your Common App filled out and completely done by around October 15th, October 20th. And so, you know, that means you really got to get cracking. Okay. Now, most students don't only apply early. They usually have a bunch of schools that they are also applying regular decision for, and more or less that regular decision is January 1st, that deadline. A lot of students want to take a break in November, and then they want to get started and do everything else in December. Personally, when I'm working privately with students, I don't allow them to do that. I don't think that's a great strategy because, first of all, as Newton said, and I wasn't a physics teacher, I was a history teacher, so I may get the wording wrong. Bodies in motion stay in motion, okay? You are used to cranking out those supplemental essays through September, October, continue into November, and don't finish until you're done in December, and then just get them in. Or save them until you get word from your early college whether you need to pay the application fee. The reason why I don't like stopping the essay writing process, it's okay if you don't want to submit and you don't want to pay. I get that. Don't waste your parents' money unnecessarily. But what happens if you stop and you wait until December 15th and you find out that your ED or EA school rejected you? Now you're depressed. The holidays are coming up. And now you maybe have to write 30 more supplemental essays. Okay. That is not a great position to be in. Better to write them and be in the enviable position of not needing them if you get accepted. And then that extra time you spent you won't even think about it. But if it turns out that you are unlucky and you do need them, believe me, you're going to be so glad that you had them done. So at least you can enjoy the holidays with your families. So 12th grade in the winter and spring, what should you be doing? First, I just want you to remember, once those applications are all in, it is out of your hands by and large, okay? But you should really be thinking, I can have an amazing college experience anywhere. And if you have not yet traveled to your safety schools, I really recommend taking this time to travel to those safety schools, just in case those are the schools that you wind up having to choose from. Okay. Definitely, you want to stay engaged in school and keep your grades up. Your guidance counselor will send you usually your mid-year grades if you applied early, as well as your end-of-year grades to the colleges. And colleges sometimes do revoke admissions to students who do very poorly in the senior slump spring. Okay, so keep those grades up. I'm not saying you need to get an A+ average, but don't let it drop too much from what it currently is. If you're feeling burnt out, consider a gap year, and we'll talk about a gap year in a second. But the other big thing is that you really want to watch what you post on social media. And I should really put this in the beginning, because it's really something that you should really be watching out for from 9th through 10th, 11th, and 12th grade, right? But there is a really infamous example of Harvard actually revoking the letter of acceptance that it gave to a young man about a decade ago or so, not for something that he posted on social media, which wasn't even as big then as it is today, but because of some off-color remarks he made in a text thread. One of the people on the text thread, I guess, shared it with Harvard, and Harvard got wind of it and revoked his letter of acceptance. So this kind of thing does happen, and it would be really a shame if it happened to you. So you want to just keep that in mind. So just a little note about gap years and community college. I think that especially now, since the pandemic, they definitely have gotten a lot more press. Okay. If you're unaware with it, because it wasn't, if you're a parent watching and you went to high school in the 70s, 80s, or 90s, you may not know what a gap year is. A gap year is a year off, basically, that a student will take between 12th grade and when they start college. And it is a great time for a kid who maybe needs a little growing up to do. Maybe a student wants to get some work experience, maybe needs to earn some money. All of those are really legitimate reasons to take a gap year. Of course, since COVID, I actually had couple of twins that I worked with in Brussels, Belgium, and their mom was a classmate of mine at Harvard, and they wound up applying, getting accepted to schools in the spring of 2020. They applied in 2019, got accepted 2020, but then took the 2020-21 year off and are just starting their freshman year right now. And I mean, it's great. They stayed closer to home during a really tough year, and they got some great work experience during that time too. Of course, community college can be a time where you can save money and also transfer. And a lot of people were looking into that when, for instance, it costs so much money to attend a private liberal arts college for a 4-year degree. But then when everybody went online anyway, lots of people said, oh, well, I'll just go to community college. I do believe that community college can be great for students who are not really sure of what they want to major in, who are perhaps a little bit more immature than their peers, and for a family whose finances can't afford a 4-year degree. I will just say, however, you want to make really sure that you know exactly what courses you should be taking, and most likely where you want to transfer to. And constantly be checking with the advisor, both at your school, at your community college, as well as the college or university where you're applying to, that those credits will transfer. Because as I believe Ron Lieber explains in the book, The Price You Pay for College, lots of students, because the credits wind up not transferring, or if students don't know where they're going to apply, they wind up taking, say, 3 years at a community college and then 3 more years at a university for a total of 6 years, spending almost as much as they would have if they had just gone to a university right out of high school anyway. So you really need to be, and I recommend reading Lieber's book, or at least the chapter on community college if you're thinking of doing that plan. Okay. So I went a little bit over my 30 minutes. It's about 45 minutes. I'd just like to tell you that even though this is a pre-recorded talk, I'm always happy to share my tips with you, and that if you'd like to receive Dr. P's college planning checklist, please email me at info@crimsoncoaching.com for a little PDF. Usually when I do these workshops in person, when I used to, in the days before the pandemic, I would give you a little handout because I'm a teacher like that, and now my handout is virtual. So feel free to email me for that. If you'd like to be notified of when I give other talks like this on adolescent education and the college planning process, either like Crimson Coaching on Facebook, or I should say, sign up for my newsletters at crimsoncoaching.com. You can also, by the way, check my website, which has a classes and workshops page, and it'll give you all my upcoming talks. And finally, you can subscribe to youtube.com/c/Crimson Coaching in order to be notified when I post new videos of talks like these, as well as I'm planning on doing a series of shorter tips, like maybe 2 to 3 minute videos on everything from how to study better to how to take great notes. So normally this is where I ask for questions, but clearly I'm not going to get any from the audience right now. So this is where you can get in touch with me. Once again, thank you for watching. Thank you to Laura Panter for setting this talk up, and for the Sachem Public Library for sponsoring it. I'm Dr. P, the founder and president of Crimson Coaching, which provides academic tutoring, test prep, and college counseling to students worldwide. I hope you enjoy this talk and learn something valuable from it. Thank you.